Hello, folks. My name is Dennis Yitanen. I'm an associate professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia University, where I also co-direct the Center for Comparative Media. Now, I'm very sorry I couldn't make it in person today. Uh, the program looks amazing, and I will be following up with you on your talks, and I hope this is a beginning of a conversation, not a conclusion of a conversation. Now, one second, let me just start the timer so I don't go over time. For the past few years, I've been teaching a class called Literature in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which resulted in a book called Literary Theory for Robots: How Computers Learn to Write. This book is coming out with Norton Press in just a few months. And I am in talks with Yangmin Kim and others and hope that there will be a Korean translation coming out shortly as well. So, what I wanted to do briefly is introduce some of the materials in this book and then maybe take a moment to discuss the things that are not in the book, the ideas and theories that led me to this particular set of academic materials, and then maybe um, discuss with you the challenges and the opportunities of working in this exciting field. Okay, so let me just first begin by showing you a few primary sources that motivate my work. When I began this project several years ago, one of my questions had to do with late 19th century, early 20th century, and specifically about um, the origins of Vladimir Prop's Morphology of Folktale. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this work, but Morphology of Folktale came out early 20th century in Russian, and it was a book that tried to derive a formula for folktales, and it suggested 36 functions that Prop called them, 36 functions that work in the background to produce many of the world um, folklore traditions. Now, I've read this book. Many of you will be familiar with this book. It is often taught as a moment in literary history, but what never made sense to me is where did this book come from? Where did this idea of literary functions come from? And working here in New York, working in the English language, what I quickly found is that the late 19th century in the English letters, the late 19th and early 20th century saw an explosion of books, of writing manuals, of these are best-selling documents and materials and pamphlets, all of them designed with the idea of making writing faster and making writing better and making writing more efficient. The genre here is a writing manual. This is how to write a bestseller and how to maybe make money and as a writer more efficiently. And the interesting part, and I think the part as to why these materials fell out of literary history as we are normally taught it, is that because the production, the kind of literature where these tools were used widely is mostly lowbrow and middlebrow pulp fiction literature. These were not, or at least not that authors admitted, these kind of materials were not used widely in, or were not discussed widely in the production of high modernist literature. So whether it's Joyce or Nabokov, it's not like they were admitting to using this kind of like how to be a better writer manual. So let me show you some of these. One of my favorite books in this genre is called The Plot Genie. The Plot Genie was a book containing a number of twists, situations, dramatic persona, and these were just numbered like this as you see it here. And the way you would use this book is the book came with this insert. So this was a rectangular insert with the brass button in the middle. You will see that this is called the plot robot, and the plot robot was supposed to help you create short stories and novels quickly. And so it's kind of hard to see, but On the right side, you see this little protrusion here. There's a wheel inside there. You would spin this wheel. In this little window here, a number would appear, and then you would use this number to select a situation. So, for example, here's a climax or a surprise twist, a disaster prevented by earthquake. So that's your plot, and then you would do the same kind of twisting for selecting characters. So maybe in our story we have a disaster prevented by earthquake, and then you would spin again and you would go to a list of characters, and your character would be an accountant who falls in love with an acrobat, whatever it is. So in a combinatorial way, this book would quickly get you some kind of sensationalist pulp fictiony kind of story. This book was sold for decades. It was on the bestseller list for decades, and therefore we know that this was widely used among a particular subset of authors. The authors of this book created these materials and these charts for comedy, for drama, for romance, uh, and for detective stories, and so on. They were sold separately. Here's one for the formula for detective mystery. So as you can see, the important part, note that already in this time, this is the early 20th century, people are using this explicitly using this idea of a robot. Here's a paper machine that is designed to generate stories, and they're understanding that what they're doing, similar to the Russian formalists, similar to the structuralists, the literary structuralists writing at the time, but these are materials on the production side of the equation. So these are materials for working writers, and they're doing something very similar to what we normally associate with the formalist movement. They're using formulas and robots and techniques and devices to accelerate the writing of fiction during this time. Here is another book in this genre. I mean, I truly have hundreds of examples of this genre. Another interesting part is these books are not very well collected in the libraries. So because academic libraries, again, this was seen as sort of a little bit of a middle brow, a little bit of a shameful secret of writing. You would not want to admit that you're using these kind of techniques if you were a best-selling author, but maybe secretly at your writing desk, this is the kind of stuff you were using. This book here would had a more complicated grammar of plot elements, and you would also use this book to navigate through this book, proceeding from one element to another, which would at the end, you can think of it as a random walk, but at the end of this random walk through this volume, you would have a skeleton of the story. The skeleton is a good word here because lots of books in the genre were actually called, especially in the 19th century, they were called skeleton keys. And skeleton keys were used for writing fiction, but also for writing essays, for example. So, when contemporary instructors worry about their students cheating on their exams because they're going to use ChatGPT or other algorithmic tools, well, let me tell you that this kind of algorithmic composition was used by students at least since the 19th century. Skeleton keys were books that would contain fill in the blanks skeletons of essays. You would then take the skeleton of an essay and then pretty much fill in some of the blanks, change a few words here and there, and then you could submit that work as part of your instruction. And those were sold widely, again, starting from the 19th century. Um, Here we see a patent from 1916. These are just more examples in this genre. You see a patent from 1916 called the movie writer, and the movie writer was a box with scrolls. So you can see that their number right here, the number of knobs, one, two, three, four, five, six. And so uh, what you do is you would rotate these knobs, and in rotating these knobs, you would get the skeleton of a plot again. So here you have a plot: aged, aviator, what is it? Bribes, a cannibal, carousal, and then escape happens. So you can see that in each of these knobs, what you have is a list of possible situations or characters, and by spinning them around, you are creating essentially a ready-made plot for Broadway or for Hollywood. Now, I think um, here we go. Here's some more illustrations of this particular device. Now, I think what's what's important, what I want to highlight here is that the majority of my work, especially the novel contributions, finding this archive of these devices and these materials, they happened in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And I think this is really a part of literary history that is hugely underwritten. There's very few historical or literary theoretical works that manage to capture this particular practice. Now, I told you I'm primarily working in English, maybe a little bit in French and Russian, but it would be really fascinating for me to talk to other scholars who are similarly looking at writing manuals and these kind of writing aids, devices that facilitate writing in other cultures, in Korean, in Japanese, in Chinese, in various other languages, in Arabic. Their use is quite extensive once you start looking for them, and I think their use will be different in different cultures. So, for example, I do have in my book evidence of similar devices being used as far back as the 14th century in the Arabic tradition. Now, the obvious provocation that I'm trying to make here is to say that writing algorithmically, writing with smart tools has happened well before computers. And when the first generation of computer systems is beginning to be implemented into the actual practice of writing, so when MIT or Harvard, when they get their first giant mainframe computers, and when they begin to play around with computers generating text and creating the first text editors, creating the first spell checkers, creating the first chatbots, they are the engineers working on this problem. They reach back not only to the literary theory that we know, formalism and structuralism, but they actually reach back to patents such as these before you and the the literary technologies, the paper and ink literary technologies of the late 19th and 20th, early 20th centuries begin to be implemented in the first generation of artificial intelligence tools in the middle of the 20th century. And that's another huge part, and I dedicate several chapters to this particular story, to the story of 1950s and 1960s, the first generation artificial intelligence text generators that are digital versions of these paper devices. So again, it's a history that I'm interested in mining, and I think this book is really only scratches the surface of the kind of materials that are available. Now, the time is running short, so if you visit this exhibition Literary AI at Columbia RBML, Alex Hill in attendance was one of the people who helped me put this exhibition together. You will see many other kind of materials. I mean, like I said, it's just the algorithmic composition is just a part of what I was able to uncover. But let's pause for a second here because like I said, the materials are too many and we could spend hours looking at each one of them. But I want to open up a little bit about my theoretical and methodological assumptions that led me to finding this archive in the first place. Let's call them three theses. So three ideas about algorithmic composition that I would like to put before you. So the first idea is to say that writing, authorship, is a mode of production. When we normally think of literary studies and literary theory, literary history, we very often study it from the point of view of consumption and from the point of view of reception. So we look at a text, we look at a text as a completed object, and we analyze what it means. So it's already the text arrives to us as a completed, uniform kind of thing, and we right away begin the process of analysis. And that's fine. That's a huge part of what we do as literary scholars. However, a big piece that's missing here in the study of literary culture is the study of literary production. How an author, materially, how an author writes a text, what kind of tools physically and technologically are being used to augment the process of authorship. These kind of studies often fall out of the purview of literary scholarship. And here there's so much work to be done, and I'm so interested. Once you start thinking of authorship as labor, as production, we can begin an inquiry into the material context of production. How did the writing desks, what kind of pens? I don't know. These are the simple stuff, but I have a whole chapter on literary filing techniques, the way authors would collect information from the world and then organize it in filing cabinets and then retrieve it for later use to provide realistic detail in fiction. Okay, that's a whole, filing cabinets, the study of furniture, the kind of furniture, physical and digital, that surrounds the activity of authorship. So, point one is authorship is labor. And once we see it as labor, we can see that the kind of trends we saw in uh, generally in the industrialization of labor, which culminates in the 19th century and goes into the 20th century, the kind of disruption we see of all labor markets, but usually we think of it as manual labor, and we see the same kind of disruption all the way through today, where knowledge work, authorial work, whether it's being a legal professional or a physician or a professor or an author, all of us as workers, our labor conditions are always disrupted by industrialization. So that's one. What follows from this first premise that writing is work, writing is labor, is that labor is always mediated by tools. So in almost any field, humans are particular for using tools. In almost anything we do, we very rarely just use our hands without some kind of help from tools. And that means that the study of literary tools, the study of the tools that participate in knowledge making, falls under the purview of literary history. And this is also, I mean, think of how much opportunity there is here. Think of the sort of tools you use on a daily basis to write. At the very least, a word processor. I would love to see more granular histories of word processing, a spell checker, a sentence completion, a dictionary, a grammar book. I mean, we are surrounded. I'm looking around my office and I'm looking around my digital office, and what I see is being surrounded by tools that help me create, help me author, help me write in significant ways. So my proposition number two is to say that if authorship is labor, then labor is also always mediated by tools, and that these tools deserve to be studied. And finally, what follows from the first two ideas is that the very idea of a tool implies a type of collaborative creation. Writing is rarely happens, even if you are alone in the room. Writing rarely happens in isolation. This romantic notion of a genius author who sits there and who out of nothing creates poetry or creates novels or creates science or whatever it is, we know that that's too much of a simplistic idea. When we are writing, when we are editing our words, we're using tools. We're using even a simple dictionary. So what is a dictionary? In the English language, it took several centuries to really compile significant dictionaries, and for dictionaries to become a common tool for any author. A dictionary is a smart object that makes me a better writer, that makes us more literate. We are becoming more literate by the use of grammar books and dictionaries. And the a number of people, the amount of people who contribute to the dictionaries, probably in the thousands and hundreds of thousands. You have a team in a dictionary, you have the distillation of the work of large collaborative teams who are present, so though they're not present with you in the room, through the tool, through the dictionary, through the chat GPT, through the auto-completion tool, through the grammar check tool in your word processor, you are writing together with this shadowy team of co-authors who are writing with you. So writing is labor, labor is mediated by tools, and through this mediation, writing becomes a social collaborative process. I have much more to say. I hope to be in touch with you about these ideas. I hope to see more work coming from the production side. And I thank you for being patient and for thinking with me about this topic. Thank you. Bye bye.